Hi, I'm Karin Hurt.
And I'm David Dye.
And we're the authors of Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro-Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. And we help leaders around the world focus on being human-centered leaders and navigate workplace ambiguity and chaos through very practical tools and techniques.
Helping leaders get results without losing their soul or their mind in the process. So today we're going to talk about if you want to have a courageous culture, you want to get ideas, but it's not happening. Why is that? What can you do about it? We're also going to talk about what do you do if someone brings you a crazy off-the-wall idea you can't use, but in a way that doesn't crush your culture.
As well as the top 3 reasons your team lacks courage and what to do about it. And what do you do if your boss is not so courageous? How do you build a courageous culture then? So stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, how about becoming more courageous? How about creating a culture where courage is not punished, but is actually rewarded? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. If you're curious to know more, simply take yourself over to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your mind and your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and oftentimes intense conversations with people who are like Grammy Award-winning entertainers, skeptics, entrepreneurs, quantum physicists, holy people, philosophers, neuroscientists, astronauts. I mean, it is across the board, all truly fascinating people. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, or wherever it is that you tune into podcasts. We are always needing your help to stay relevant. So please do us a favor, get over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better listener. You can also listen to us on Google Home or Alexa by simply saying play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing this show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. In case you don't know, for the last 100 or so years, we've had what's called a command and control leadership style running most businesses and most organizations. And in a command control environment, courage is often seen as troublemaking. And if it continues, if the culture continues to be driven by that, you create a culture of fear. But what might be the advantage of creating a culture that not only supports you speaking up, but actually rewards it? Because it can. Well, let's find out together, because our guests today are Karin Hurt and David Dye. They are the founders of Let's Grow Leaders, helping leaders around the world get breakthrough results without losing their souls. Key point, without losing their souls. Karin is a top leadership consultant and CEO of Let's Grow Leaders. She's a former Verizon Wireless executive, and she was named by Inc. magazine's list of great leadership speakers David Dye is a former executive elected official. Want to know more about that? And president of Let's Grow Leaders. Karin and David are committed to their philanthropic initiatives, winning wells, building clean water wells for people of Cambodia. Their latest book, published through Harper Collins, is titled Courageous Cultures: How to Build a Team of Micro-Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. It's been a game-changing for helping companies thrive particularly during this, shall we say, challenging time known as the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome Karin Hurt and David Dye. Good to have you guys.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Thank you so much. Let's start with the question we always like to start the show, which is, in this time where everybody thinks they're an influencer or claims to be an influencer or is even getting paid to influence by showing their butt cheeks, who is somebody who has influenced you guys, not in that way, in the context of leadership that we might not know, we might not think of, maybe have never even heard of? Who's somebody who's really influenced you guys around leadership?
You know, it's interesting because one of my very first bosses was named Gary Creighton, and he pulled me out of a PhD program that I was working on and said, hey, you want to come do this for real instead of studying leadership? Do you want to come be a leader and work for me? So he was trying to do some innovative things around self-directed work teams back in the day when that was all hot. And what I found was so interesting about Gary was he was consistently pushing the envelope, doing really innovative things with his team in field organizations. He wasn't an HR guy. He was running a sales team, running call centers. He was doing all of that, but he was not doing this is at Verizon. He was not doing what everybody else was doing. So if these programs were rolling out, he'd say, what would you think about if I did a pilot about this? And it would be the opposite. But he was doing it in such a politically correct way that he was getting away with it. And so what I learned from him was really, how do you be an intrapreneur? You know, how do you push the envelope? How do you think about things differently and do it in a way that you're still going to get the respect that you need, get things done, get the resources that you need. And so he would do some really innovative things. Like one of the first things he did my first week on the job, he said, okay, so, hey, you director of sales, hey, you director of customer service, hey, you Karin Hurt doing the HR thing, you're going to come together, but guess what? All of your bonuses are all tied together. And that was unprecedented at the time. And he's like, so you're either going to all succeed or you're not. And that pilot, we knocked the results out above anybody else in doing the work that we were doing. But we had a lot of conflict along the way. You know, we had to figure it out because we cared about our bonuses.
So if you put that into a nutshell, what was the big lesson from him?
I think the big lesson was, first, push the envelope. Just don't, even if you're in corporate, don't just do what has always been done. And know the importance of getting other people on board with your ideas. Fabulous.
Very cool. What about you, David?
Well, I was going to go with a Gary as well, but I think I'm going to change since Karin went with a Gary. And I'm going to go with a Jane Miller. Jane has been a CEO of a number of different food companies. She was VP for Heinz Europe, but most recently she's the CEO for Lily's Sweets. So they do, less sugar chocolates and things like that. But she was a mentor of mine many, many years ago. And from a leadership coaching perspective, and I was working through as a mid-level manager, working through some challenges and looking for answers. And I felt if I just found the right set of approaches, I would have the influence I wanted. I would have the breakthroughs that I needed to get. And finally, about 4 sessions in, she said, all right, stop, we're done. There's no technique. There's no strategy here. You know everything you need to know. You just need to have the confidence to lead, to step out and do what needs to be done. And if you will do that, she said, my suspicion is things will fall in line and you're going to see the results that you're after. And she was absolutely right. And with that encouragement, I was able to take those steps. So have the confidence to do what needs to be done and not always looking for just the right, perfect solution was a key takeaway for me from her.
That's cool. And, but the challenge with it becomes is, just have confidence is like, well, just believe in yourself or just
Right.
love yourself. Okay, I'm loving myself. It's not working. You know what I mean? It's like these things become cliche. You know what I mean? So what was the practicality of that? Because I hate those cliches because a lot of people, it makes people end up feeling inadequate because they're like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know how to have the confidence. I don't have the confidence, obviously. So
And I think that you have to be contextual with these things. For me in
of
that
course,
moment, it was my lack of confidence was coming from the belief that I had that I was missing something.
right.
And so for her to say from an elevated, more senior, more experienced position at that time in my career, to say, you're not lacking anything. You have everything you need. And if anything, the only technique you're missing is ask for what you need, ask for what you want, and say, this is what I believe is the right solution. This is what I want to do. I'm not looking for anybody else to have to contribute a particular way. This is what needs to happen. So if you'll do that, I'll bet you see the results. So the practical thing there was, one, I wasn't missing anything. Two, say this and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
Very cool. Now, before we get into the whole thing around the book and courageous cultures, which is a fascinating subject, and encouraging everybody to stay with us because it's really very cool. I really want to talk about another side of what you guys are doing, because I spoke about it briefly in the intro, which is your philanthropic initiatives. Winning wells, building clean water wells for the people of Cambodia. If you, as the listener viewer, haven't been to Cambodia, it is just an incredibly beautiful country. In my experience, I was there. The people were magnificent. The warmth, the kindness, the history. I mean, aside from Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, which a lot of people today don't know about, but aside from that, and it previously being a communist country, the history of things like Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom and all these, which people who are watching are like, what's that? Just go Google it. You've seen it in movies, right? It's been in all movies. It's been in horror movies. It's been in history movies. It's very cool. Tell us about that initiative of wells in Cambodia and why Cambodia? Because, Africa needs wells too, right?
Yeah. So it was interesting. So we were talking with our friend Scott Friedman, who runs a company or a nonprofit called Together We Can Change the World. And we were talking with him about going on a trip to Cambodia to really experience and see what we could do to help. And he was talking about all the different ways that you could help. And he said, well, we've got wells, you build wells. And we had just released a book called Winning Well. So I'm like, oh, we could build winning wells. And so it's been interesting. We have over 100 winning wells in the ground so far, and had an opportunity to go visit them. And I will tell you, we had the same experience. Beautiful human beings, and having been through so much and having so little, the level of generosity, of spirit of, hey, let me climb my mango tree and get you a mango because I want to say thank you for this. Well, that kind of thing just it totally warmed our hearts. And, David will talk a little bit about why Cambodia versus some of the other areas.
Well, you can boil the ocean, right? But we're choosing a place to make an impact. And why does Cambodia have that attachment for our hearts? For all the reasons you said, but historically, it is a country that has been really suffered a lot of abuse from the rest of the world, from all of its neighbors, internally, as you mentioned, the Civil War and Pol Pot and everything. And if there are people in the world who have a right to be embittered, they would be the people of Cambodia.
Yeah.
And that was not our experience. And just so much love and generosity of spirit. And as you said, just so beautiful. And it's the power of, and when you're trying to do good in the world, to be able to leverage the good that you're doing and make the most impact you can. And clean water is one of those ways. It has such a transformative, leveraged impact on people, from their health and wellness to their economics and the produce that they can grow, and the chickens and the eggs and it just spreads, it ripples out. And so, with all of those factors, that's one of the reasons that we choose to do it there.
I wanted to bring it up early on in our recording because I think it's really important for us to pay attention to really I really believe deeply that a friend of mine and I are working on an initiative together, because part of our very courageous conversations, which we are very keen on, is that a lot of people are feeling like they can't trust politics to make a change. They can't trust, those leaders, that they can't trust their religious leaders to make the change, and that business has been very corrupt, so they don't trust them either. And we have sort of got this initiative that it's up to, we can't convince the political leaders, we certainly can't convince the religious leaders, but we can convince the business leaders. And that we can be the initiative for change. We can be the by showing that we, nothing wrong with profit, but let's use some of our profit for good. Let's do some great things with it. Let's make a difference. And if that's putting one well in the ground, fantastic. If that's putting 1,000 wells in the ground, even better. Whatever it is, but whatever it is we can do. And I wanted to bring it up because you guys are from, very corporate backgrounds. You've done a lot of things in that world. And that's why I said, David, I want to bring up the fact that you were a elected official, so you've been in those worlds, and actually you're doing this as well as doing the work in the cultural work, which I think is very powerful too. So let's sort of dive in a little bit on this, because I wanted people to understand that, because the truth of the matter is that many organizations might say or even believe that they have, quote, a courageous culture. And the title of the book, as I said, is Courageous Cultures. So for context, what do you guys define as a courageous culture, to push back against some of these, my words, not yours, clowns who think that they have a courageous culture?
So our favorite definition of culture comes from the marketing guru Seth Godin, and he just simply says, people like us do things like this. So that's culture. Love that definition. So what happens in a courageous culture? So in a courageous culture, people like us speak up. They share best practices. The default is to contribute. And that is happening at every level of the organization. So people are coming to work saying, how can we make this better? And are bringing forward their ideas.
I love that. That's very simple, but it's just contributing. So, when you come across that, and you hear the Gallup research on disengagement, do you see that as being a lack of courage, or not a lack of courage, but a lack of the facilitation of a courageous environment?
What, I'm going to answer that by going back to one of the reasons that we did the research around this in the first place. And as we were doing the leadership work that we were doing in organizations, we would talk with executives who would say things like, why am I the only one who's seeing these problems? Why do I have to come up with the solutions? And then you would talk to people, we'd go to do the frontline leadership training, and we would hear from the frontline folks, no one here really wants to hear my opinion. They're set in their ways. They're stuck there. And we would look at each other and say, are you guys working in the same organization? And so we were frequently seeing this again and again, where you had senior leaders who really did value contribution and desired it and were frustrated to the lack of it. And yet people several levels down who didn't feel that way at all. And so what was going on there? So that's why we started down the road. We partnered with the University of Northern Colorado Social Research Lab to do the quantitative and qualitative research around why does this happen and how do organizations overcome it. And so that, going back to your question about what's happening there is a lot of times people, and even the question you asked before that, a lot of times people want the culture, think they're doing the right things for it, but it's not happening. And so that's why we wrote the book. That's the stuff that we uncovered in the research and giving leaders the roadmap to be able to get there.
So if you were to say, and maybe you can't say it in a fine point, but what is the gap? Because they think they have it, they say they want it, yet they don't have it.
Yeah. So the research pointed to a number of things. The most interesting thing is that 49% of our respondents said the reason that they do not share an idea is because no one asked. Now, when you go back and do the qualitative interviews and you say to the executives, well, they're saying you're not asking. And they're like, for Pete's sake, I have an open door. Well,
yeah. Okay.
And so the challenge with an open door is that it's passive. Right. So, and it still takes some level of courage if you've got any level of toxicity in the culture to go through that open door. So one of the most important things is, being proactive about asking. Another is 50% said, the reason I don't share an idea, and by the way, these ideas are not trivial. They're not kombucha in the break room kind of ideas. They're, ideas to improve the customer experience, the employee experience, or productivity in a process. The reason I wouldn't share an idea like that, 50% said nothing will ever happen. Now, here's the interesting thing. Some of the times it is happening. It's just that the loop hasn't been closed and people haven't let people know what's going on. And then one of the most surprising elements in the research was 56% said, I won't get credit. That's why I won't share the ideas. Yeah. And who's stealing the credit a lot of time? Perceived to be the boss.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's been interesting as we've been sharing that statistic. You can see it in audiences, even over Zoom. Everybody's like, that happened to me too. And so I think that's very relevant. Now, whether people are actually stealing ideas or whether they are just, moving fast and forgetting to, attribute, where they're getting the information from, that's another question.
And then the final bit I would share that goes into some of the human psychology that as leaders we need to be aware of if we're going to create the culture we're talking about here is in the research that 40% of people of the respondents said they lack the confidence to share.
That sounds like somebody by the name of David.
Right
back then. I mean, because that's what it's lacking that confidence. Yeah,
exactly. So 40% said, I lack that confidence. Well, when we dug into it, you talk, you get familiar with like Dr. Amy Edmondson's work and the Fearless Organization, a pioneer in psychological safety, and wrote the foreword to our book. And she talks about two factors that exist in most human beings. And one is that we overweight past negative experiences. And we saw this constantly in interviews where we talk with somebody and they'd say, I'm never speaking up again. And yet she burned me once, right? We said, well, what happened? And they would describe it. Like, well, was that with your current manager? Oh, no, that wasn't even at this company, but I'm never doing that again, And then the other is the tendency to underestimate the value that would happen from contributing an idea, that just how much of a difference it could make. And so those two factors, overweighting past negative, undervaluing future benefit, those exist in the majority of human beings, regardless of how human-centered you might be as a leader, how desirous you are of innovative ideas and thinking. And so we have to be deliberate as leaders in creating a culture and engaging with our people in a way that will overcome those natural default tendencies to safe silence.
And, I think you guys bring up extraordinarily important points, because we're now in my world, in the psychology side of it, which is, people are imprinted with these negative or perceived negative experiences, and that they do run burn me once, I ain't getting burned again, right? And as you said, it might be several companies ago, and so let's pretend we've got a fairly actualized leader who says, I'm really creating all the space for them to do that, but they're not coming to that. And we can guess that it's because they used to work for XYZ company, and, they got really, they got their ideas stolen, or they got punished. So I've told them it's safe. I've demonstrated it's safe. How do I make it safe? And I think that is what the format is of this book, is laying out how to do that, how to actually make it a safe place. Because saying we've got one and stepping through that is quite different than the actual thing itself, which is that what is the actual culture? How do I set that up? And I loved what you did in your, I'm just pulling it up here in front of me, which is your 7 steps to a courageous culture. So can we walk through some of that just to give people, I mean, we'll do all 7, and then we'll pull out 1 or 2 if that's all right.
Okay, that sounds great. So it starts by navigating the narrative. And this is, that's what we call, getting real with yourself around your own relationship with courage and speaking up, because leaders go first. And if your team is watching you and you're like, yeah, I really want your ideas, you should speak up, but you are not confronting your peers when you need to, you're not speaking up, sharing ideas with your boss, everybody's watching exactly what you're doing. So it's, navigating the narrative, and then it's creating clarity. And that's clarity around 2 things. 1, clarity that you really do want people's ideas.
Yes.
And clarity around what a good idea would accomplish. And this is really, really important, because a lot of times when managers would come to us and say, you know what, my team is just not strategic. They don't get it. They don't have enough context or information to be strategic. So if you want good ideas about this topic, then you need to see clear, I need good ideas about this topic. And we tested our tools around and in 2 ways. And one where we say, bring us any ideas you have to improve the business. And then we said, okay, bring us any ideas to help with this strategic initiative. The level of quality of the ideas, when we got specific about where you needed an idea, was radically different. So navigate the narrative, create clarity, then cultivate curiosity. And this is where you proactively go out and ask for ideas. And we can talk about some ways to do that. And then David's favorite,
respond with regard. We got stay curious over Dove's shoulder there, right? The cultivate curiosity. And then as you're getting the ideas and hearing things, to respond with regard. And how you respond makes the biggest difference in whether that momentum is whether all your starting initiative is going to result in anything and keep going, or fall on its face.
Yeah. And so then, so those are the 4 main ones. I think if you get those down, those are the really, really critical ones. And then we have, galvanizing the genius, which is how do you take an idea, and once you have it, run it through and figure out how to, make that embedded in your culture. And then, what we call practice the principle. And we have in chapter 6 of the book, we have a very good case study about how do you take an idea and how do you scale it for different parts of your market or your customer bases. And that's another element of curiosity, because that's one of the biggest mistakes we see people make. What they find a best practice, everybody should do this now. Well, it might not work in Roanoke, Virginia. So how do you make, what is the element of that made it work in New York City? How do you then take the concept of that and make it work in Roanoke, Virginia? And then creating an infrastructure for courage. And this is all about your HR systems and processes. How are you, from the moment somebody walks in the door, how are you onboarding them and being really clear that you want people's ideas? How are you tapping into the ideas they're bringing from your competitors? What is your rewards and recognition system like? How do you reward people for bringing ideas?
Yeah, and I was going to say, Dove, as you're thinking about these 7 steps, the thread through all of them is their behavioral. It just goes back to what you were saying earlier. It's one thing to say, this is what we want, but that's not how humans act. And it's not what we respond to. We watch what you do. And so as a leader, we actually invite you in the book, don't declare you're creating a courageous culture. Start engaging in the process of these steps with your immediate team and build it from there.
Yeah. And I think a really important element too, that we talk about before we even get to the 7 steps, is make sure you don't have any toxic courage crushers going on. Like if you've got Me Too stuff going on, if you've got shame, blame, intimidation, if you got any of that crap, then there's no way people are going to feel safe to, they're still worried about survival. They're not worried about bringing you ideas. So you've got to eliminate that. And if you've got even one manager who you're letting get away because they've got high performance another way, and you're letting them get away with some of that stuff, everybody is watching, and you will not have the infrastructure you need to build a courageous culture.
So you bring up a couple of points there that are vitally important. I'm going to come back to some of the 7 steps in a moment, but I want to go to these first, which is, first of all, we're living in this woke idea of political correctness, and that in its way has created a ton of fear. Because people are terrified of saying anything in case they get their legs slapped or get canceled or get fired or whatever it might be. And so when we talk about creating a courageous culture, that is one of the things that I think you're going to bang up against. And I just want to be the voice of the listener and saying, I would like to have a courageous environment, but speaking the truth and everybody's on edge about, well, I don't know if I can say this. I want to say this. I don't mean to be offensive. I have no intention of hurting anybody's feelings, but I know that Sally got a leg slapped, and what I thought she said was pretty neutral, or John got his leg slapped and I thought what he said was pretty neutral. So so that is part of the challenge that I feel is a hurdle for this. And I know you guys are very keen on building these cultures and encouraging that. Talk to us about dealing with that side of it.
Well, the number one response I would give is exactly those words that are over your shoulder, which is to stay curious.
Right.
And, I've been talking with different leaders about this recently, and the getting comfortable with discomfort. It's okay to be uncomfortable and uncertain. And in fact, as we're learning and as people overcoming these things that have been in human history, and there's no escaping that they are factual, right? They exist, but how we overcome and deal with them is going to take us staying curious with one another and being uncomfortable sometimes of going, getting your legs slapped, for instance, to use the example there. I had that happen. I spoke at a conference 2 years ago, and I shared a story that comes from such a place of love and compassion that I have shared easily 200 times, and it didn't land well. And I had one participant, a Black woman, who came up to me afterwards, and in the most loving, compassionate way possible. And, if you're listening to this, I'm a white male, who came up to me and said, that story you told could come across, I suspect that is not your heart, but it could come across as offensive to other people. And here's why. And it hurt, because that's not how I viewed myself, and that was not my intent. But the reality was, once I got comfortable and was willing to step into that discomfort, she was right. And it was one I needed to let go. And so I started with the normal human reaction of like, well, I wanted to push it away. It was uncomfortable. You don't know me. You don't know my heart. You don't.
Of course.
Right. All of which might have been true. But the reality was, if I could stay curious and be comfortable with some discomfort, there was an opportunity for me to learn and grow and be more effective. And ultimately, as leaders, that's what we want, is to be more effective. And so that, that's, to me, that's part of the solution to this is for us to be able to do that. And as leaders, can we create that environment where it's not about what happened over in that department? It's not about anything else. All I can take responsibility for is what's happening on my team or in my organization, in my company, depending on, your level of leadership.
Yeah. And I think it's been interesting as we've been doing some of our longer term leadership development programs with companies. One of the things is I think you never have it handled, so, you're teaching these, you're teaching critical thinking, you're teaching problem solving, you're teaching people to speak up. Oh, and now we're having an election, and everybody is now fired up and don't know how to talk with one another. So it's really interesting. So in this one company we were working with, they're like, we had our things that we were doing, and the CHRO called and said, could you do a special emergency session for us on helping managers navigate how to help people have or not have these conversations on the team? Like, we need to do a timeout before we do anything else, because people are wasting time and energy and they don't know how to handle it. And so, we did just, basic emotional intelligence, reflect to connect. How do you do this? You don't need to share your point of view. You can stay neutral and the basic stuff. But I think just being able to do that, kind of what you have to be sensitive to, when do you need to time out your whatever is happening in the business and care for that. Because if you ignore it and pretend it's not there, and you just keep forging forward with whatever else you've got on the agenda, people they're not going to listen.
Excuse me. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, it's politically hot conversations and all those things. And yeah, working out what's comfortable, what's not comfortable. But I want to make sure that people get the context of this. Again, I'm a big fan of context, and it's what you were talking about, is that a courageous culture isn't about a place you can go and speak your vile vomit onto people.
Right.
That's
Absolutely
not what it is. And so talk to me just about that bit so that we can, I want to move on, but I want to make sure that is like nailed to the wall.
Yeah.
It's not about emotionally, politically vomiting on others and making, I'm just being courageous.
Yeah,
Because
not at
I know
all.
that everybody likes to grab a title and go, see, I'm just doing what you said. I'm being courageous. No, you're being a dick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about one of the things that I just did a whole series of interviews with credit union CEOs because we were speaking at a credit union conference, and one of the people who really had, I believe, really had courageous cultures. And this one woman said, hey, one of the things that I personally go in and teach in our new hire orientation is, you can say anything you want, but you have to say it in a way that we can all effectively work together the next day. And so if you have ideas, if you think a policy is broken, if you think we've got to address something, let me teach you how to say this in a way that is respectful, that builds the relationship and leaves things intact, and builds that into her new hire orientation. And a lot of what we do in our Courageous Cultures programs is teach people how to share their ideas in a way that can be heard.
Right.
And and position them in that way.
And and getting to the vomit aspect of what you were talking about, the bile, if it is affecting somebody's dignity, it has no place in the workplace. And you can't have a positive work culture that's solving problems and better serving your customer and building a better tomorrow. You can't do any of that. No. If it takes a massive amount of courage for any of the human beings on your team to just show up and do their job.
Yeah.
If they have to use all their courage just to show up and get through another day, you're never going to be at the top of your game. And that's as simple as I could put it in terms of eliminating toxic courage crushers in order to get to a courageous culture.
It's interesting because Jason Fried of Basecamp is an example that we use in the book. And we would argue he has a courageous culture where people are speaking up and they are sharing ideas. And he recently made a controversial move that says you can't talk about politics in Basecamp, in their system, to one another, in their own organization. And I think that's definitely he's still creating a courageous culture where people could speak up and share their ideas, but it's not creating an infrastructure that they can use their platform to talk negatively to one another about, things that have nothing to do with the workplace. And so I think that's also.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that I've been speaking about and teaching on recently too, is I wrote an article and said, okay, this was before the elections. And I said, when the election is over and, things have calmed down from the hyperbolic situation that it was at the time, I said, you're still going to have people who work for you who are extreme left or extreme right, or even slightly left or slightly right. And you're still going to have to deal with that. And those people are still going to be on the same teams and you have to work together. And I said, when we talk about open communication and the need for open communication, courageous conversations, as we talk about, we also say, you got to understand something. Healthy boundaries are a part of that. If you have children, you say, oh, you can speak about whatever you like, kids. Then your kids learn nothing about respect, nothing about dignity, nothing about honoring other people. You have to create healthy boundaries. And this is a little old school, but as the owner or the boss, you are in a parental role psychologically. And those people are going to look at you in that parental role, and you have to set those boundaries. And that's why I say, coming back to your point earlier, why I think that the open door policy is the biggest joke of all the universe, because an open door policy means nothing if there's a force field that people can't cross because of a power imbalance. And that's why if you have an open door policy, that means you got to go out, not people can come in. Right. It means because you can take the door off. It won't make any difference. But if you don't actually go out and elicit, nobody's coming to you, because that force field of hierarchy of power is there. And it's the same thing with this. It's like, setting healthy boundaries is not about walls or blocks. It's about this is just not appropriate here. That's all. Just like, it's not appropriate here. And once you get that, it's like, oh, okay. I mean, I think that most people can be, unless they can't, most people can be respectful of that. And if they can't, they should probably go work somewhere else. Right. But that's it. Now, there's a lot in here and a lot we can unpack. But one of the things I really want to go to, because I think it's really important for everybody to get, is you guys have exploded during the pandemic. Like, your tools, what it is you're doing. And it would seem maybe to many people, how do you, I don't know, I don't even know how we do this in this remote time that we've been in, and you've helped companies who've been using the tools to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive during this last 18 months or so. So talk to us a little bit about how they've been using it and what's, maybe it's very valuable to people, because nobody's going back to work in the way we did before.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you start just back to context, right? As this whole thing happened, there was no handbook that you could order on Amazon about how to pivot your business in the midst of a pandemic and deal with all of that. And
well, there's at least 45 of them now.
Now there are, there's a few more that quickly
everybody's
came out,
an
right?
expert now.
And so when we started this research, we had obviously no idea that this was coming, but why did it resonate? Well, so as we have had these conversations, you can have one leader, maybe they're the business owner, or maybe it's a department head, trying to think and solve all these problems. Or you can have one leader ask a really good question. This is where we need a great idea. And you can have 100 people parallel processing on potential solutions and so on. Well, that's what a courageous culture does for you. And so that's why the tools have resonated and been so helpful to so many during this time.
Yeah, it was interesting because I got a call right after the book was out from a very senior guy at one of the departments at Amazon. And he said, Karin, I've been reading your blog since 2014. I've read your book now, and I finally figured out how we're going to work together. I'm like, well, that's good. And he said, so here's the thing. So he had 4 different big divisions that he needed ideas from, and he knew exactly where he needed a great idea.
Oh, wow.
So, he's like, so I'm going to have a conference, and I'm going to talk about my strategic initiatives. And then we're going to use your tools to help come up with ideas to solve these issues. And he paired it with his vulnerability. He was doing a great job with navigating the narrative. He's like, here's the deal. And he starts so sincerely, and he looked right into the Zoom lens, right? And he said, look, here's the thing. I've been worried about this problem since China, right? So we have our Chinese teams, and I thought, oh, how, bless our hearts, how are we going to, how are we going to help our poor colleagues in China? He's like, it's never occurring to me that this is becoming a global pandemic at the beginning of this, right? So I'm working 24/7. I'm trying to get through it. And now it's in Italy. Now I'm trying to help our Italy teams. And now it's, oh my gosh, now my kids are exposed, right? And he just explains all of this. So here's the thing. I am exhausted. I feel guilty because my partner is taking care of our children. I haven't been around. He's had to deal with it all. And I tell you that not to feel sorry for me. I tell you that because this is the best navigate the narrative I've ever heard. It's like, because I know that the work we're about to do together over the next couple of days is happening in this context. I know that you have had parents that have died. I know that you have your kids swinging from the chandeliers while you're trying to do the homeschool. I know you're exhausted. I know some of you have had COVID. I know you're tired. And I am going to ask you to work with us on these 3 strategic initiatives, not to add more work, but because we've got to be able to thrive through this and know that if we come up with anything that's impossible to do in this context, then we're not going to do it. And then, I mean, you could have heard a virtual pin drop. Sure. And then it's like, okay, so here's the areas we need a great idea. And then we took them through our process. The level of thinking and contribution and engagement was fascinating. So what we call this is now we call it a fishbowl process. Think like Shark Tank, only friendlier. And so you can give you can give people these challenges, and you can even turn it into a friendly competition where you have teams coming together and sharing their ideas and pitching them and having executives review them. And we have been doing that with little guys. Lily Sweets called us and we did one with them. And so some fast growing companies, a group that had just acquired another company. Let's use the tools in that context. So I think because everyone is so used to, at this moment, having to do the best they can with what they have from where they are, this is the perfect time because you aren't doing it the way you always did it. Nobody is. And so, they talk about, old change theory, frozen, unfrozen, right? We're unfrozen. And so people are more open to the possibilities. And I think that's why these tools are working so well now.
What is the major, because you're doing this every day, you guys are working with companies and organizations. What is the major pushback you guys get?
Well, one of the first things that will come up is where leaders have a concern about creating a courageous culture is they're like, I'm going to get too many ideas. I'm not going to be able to, what am I going to do? I'm going to get overwhelmed and then people aren't going to feel heard and so on. So and there's a couple of responses to that. One is, first, as you get clear and help direct people to where you really need good thinking, that will help narrow the focus. And second is, as you respond with regard and as people share, you can say thank you, but that doesn't mean you have to use their idea. All you've done is say, hey, thank you for thinking about how we can get better. Where we really need a great idea is right here. And so we share this process of gratitude, information, and an invitation to respond with regard. So you can help redirect all of that parallel power and focus it like a laser, right? Is it just scattered light, or is it, channeled and effective? And then in the questions that you're asking, as you're out staying curious and cultivating curiosity, are you asking what we call courageous questions that are vulnerable and specific? They're specific, very limited in their focus, as Karin was mentioning earlier, and then vulnerable in that they assume that improvement is possible. And so as you're able to ask those kinds of questions, those 3 techniques all help to deal with that first objection. I'm just going to get overwhelmed. I'm going to have too many ideas. So that's the first thing that we get pushback.
And then I think it's and I wouldn't even call this pushback, but a readiness question. And we talk about this in the book. Like, you might not be ready to do a courageous culture yet if your people don't have basic management skills. And it was interesting. A woman called the other day and she said, I want to do leadership training with you. And I said, oh, are you interested in which books have you read? Are you interested in Winning Well or Courageous Culture? She said, oh, honey. If I tried to start with courageous cultures, I would just get a migraine. My people aren't ready. You've got to teach them how to have, set clear expectations, hold people accountable for those expectations, run an effective meeting. It's like, maybe someday we'll be ready for that. And I thought that was great self-awareness. If she starts to, if they don't have infrastructure and a cadence in place to lead well and get everybody moving in the same direction, to come say, hey, now we're going to need everybody's ideas, you might not be quite ready.
Yeah. And that's, some of that psychological safety exists because you have trustworthy systems and leadership and management in place, and the credibility that as a leader, you can actually do something with the ideas, or you can give the team, empower the team to do something with. That takes a certain amount of management and leadership acumen. Yes. Foundationally before you want to take that step.
And then I think the last one is, I don't have time. I don't have time for this now. Like we've been on a fast pivot. I just do not have time. And, if you clearly define where you need an idea around something, if you're out of time, then pick the strategies that would save you time. Yes. Because, and that way you don't have to, and they don't have to be big, earth-shattering ideas. These could be small incremental improvements that help you be more efficient.
On that note, a senior executive we were working with a global team, one of the challenges they were having was time. And so one of their how can we questions, like, okay, where do we need a great idea? How can we limit our meetings? It's a challenge that everybody has had as they've been working virtually. And there is no one answer. There is the answer that's going to work for your team, your organization, and they came up with some good solutions that worked for them.
You brought up a subject that we can, again, probably spend an hour on its own, which is around psychological safety, because we're living in an age of diversity, and when we hear about diversity, we often think of skin color or cultural backgrounds or, whatever it might be. And one of the things that I talk a lot about is the need for cognitive diversity, respectful cognitive diversity. But I feel that there's a hangover in corporate America, and the hangover is a lack of cognitive diversity, meaning, I'll give you a great example. A client I'm working with, he's a very high-level executive inside of an organization that he was part of a previous company that he owned, and it was an M&A. They got taken into a huge organization, but he still has a very high-level position. And he goes, they want all my ideas. He goes, that's great. He goes, I'm suddenly realized that their focus on diversity, he's a person of color, right? And he goes, that their focus on diversity is as long as I think like everybody else. And he goes, so yeah, I'm diverse because I'm not white. He goes, and there's even a couple of gay guys, and there's these guys, and all these people are different. He goes, but we're all in this group think. Yeah. And we're supposed to operate in the group think. And he and I work together in some pretty big ideas. And he's, and it's all this lack of cognitive diversity, which in many ways is just simply saying it is not an environment of courage. It's not a courageous culture, but it kind of looks like one. It's got the right color paint on the outside, and we might even have the right bean cushions, but there's nothing else. Yeah. And so one of the things that you're talking about that I think has to be addressed here is a level of self-awareness that is often so lacking. And it's what you brought up about this lady saying, my head would explode. But I think that most often, and I realize this is mean and maybe a little too generalized, but most often, most leaders are not very self-aware. I mean, some of them need a good bucket of water over their head, just to like, hey, wakey. And it's not for eggs and bakey. It's for, you're out there. You got to get with the program. And so they don't have self-awareness, therefore they don't have cultural awareness. And by that, I'm not talking about people's culture. I'm talking about they don't have an awareness of this is what's going on. When I've gone into an organization and I said, well, tell me about your culture. And they hand me a flyer.
Yeah.
And I go, that's not your culture. And they go, it is. I go, no, this is a pamphlet. They go, but that's all our culture. I go, I'll tell you what your culture is. You want to know what it is? And they go, yeah. I say, this is not your culture. Your culture is whatever you're giving permission to do. That's what culture is. It's permission. And it's permission by blind eye. It's permission by deaf ear, but it is permission. And your subculture is your culture. Your pamphlet is what you think is your culture, but it's not. Nobody gives a crap. So how do we get them to this self-awareness? As our listeners are going, okay, I really like the idea of this. I love the 7 steps. I want to build this. Maybe I have the self-awareness, but I got to lead people who don't have self-awareness.
Yeah.
That's where the roadblock is for many of them.
So many levels of answer to that.
I just threw a little thing at you.
Yeah, no. First, full transparency. You made me think about a leadership moment as an executive where I had a woman who I would have told you was one of my top 5 employees in the entire organization come into my office, walked through that open door, trembling, and said, David, I know you're getting ready to fire me. But before you do, I just want to. All right, now I told you, I think she's one of my top 5 employees. She thinks I'm getting ready to fire her.
Right.
Why? For exactly the reasons that you're talking about. The blind eye that I had been unaware of, subculture. Her specific leader who, despite my best efforts, had not developed the leadership capacity he needed and was relying on fear of, the big bad executive to try to motivate his people to do so, as opposed to developing his own credibility. And so I had to make some decisions there. I had to change how I was doing things, right? So there's the self-awareness piece that I think is critical to what you're talking about. Where does that start? Mm-hmm. So if you were the person saying, I want this in my teams, I'm not sure everybody is there. Well, right. Congratulations. So first I would celebrate that and say, good on you. You have that awareness. It is possible to start bringing people together and go through the process. The second is, and we get into this in the book about how to leverage diverse personality types and all the different kinds of folks that are out there. You've got, we call them silent ponderous, who might have a lot of thoughts, but they're not sharing them. We've got idea grenadiers who are lobbing ideas as if they were weapons. And you've got injured people. You've got a whole wide range of different. And how do you bring all of them into the conversation? So we give some step-by-steps there.
Yeah, and so one of the things we've also developed is it's a courageous cultures assessment, and it's a very it's got a lot of psychology behind it. Where it's how are you making decisions in the moment, and you get that data. And then if you work with one of our coaches and you're looking at the data, and it's very interesting, what is your level of empathy, which is important for building a courageous culture, compared to your self-esteem, right? So if you're like, but it's all of these, it's 72 different dimensions and how they all interplay together. And there's internal dimensions and the external dimensions. So you can very quickly do this and get this data. Now we're working with a company right now. We just met with CEO and CHRO and shared the data. And she's like, yes, that explains so much. And now not only will we help coach her folks, but also she knows, what do they need? What are her middle managers need to do to be able to encourage more decisions? Is it something that are they really ready? Or are they dealing with some issues? Do they have role clarity about their own role? Those kinds of conversations. So I think something like that, a psychometric thing that can get you really fast into what's going on with your team, can also really help.
Yeah, that's lovely. And that's part of the book, so they can walk through much of that themselves and get it. And that's why this is important. That's why I wanted to bring it to people, because I think that a lot of people aren't going, yeah, but my people are not ready. Well, go through this test. Go through find out. I mean, the steps you can see that they're very easy to understand. And of course, there's great depth to them, and each piece of it you can take into great detail. But there's a way to just assess and go, okay, where are we really versus where do I think we are? Because you may be further ahead than where you think, you may be further behind than where you think.
Yep.
But this way, you're going to get a clear sense of it. And then you know what the next step is. And that's often such a big piece. So talking about that context of self-awareness, you know, you're talking about courageous cultures. You grew up in the corporate world, both of you. We all know that, you know, traditional corporate culture is not so safe, not so places great for culture, for courage. When did you guys sort of get that for yourselves? Like, you know, when did you get, what was the turning point of realizing we've got to create this if it's going to happen?
You want me to go?
Yeah, why don't you start?
So it was interesting. So my last job, my last executive role, I was leading all of our outsourced contact centers. So we had 10,000 employees that were taking our calls they were working for other companies, BPOs. And we had a massive turnaround with these. So we had like 32 call centers. They were had gone from bad customer service because they had ramped up too quickly when we first started selling the iPhone to a great customer experience. And so I was bringing out one of our very senior executives on what I believed was a celebratory tour, right, for her to walk in. We were taking the corporate jet. We were going into these centers, and she was there to congratulate. Well, she walked into one of these centers that had a massive turnaround, and what I would label as toxic courage culture behaviors were coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to, this was my boss's boss. And my boss said to me, she could tell by the look on my face, and because of the kind of leader, she's like, don't say a word. Right.
Well, that sounds very much like a courage culture.
So I was like, you know, there's a difference between courage and stupidity.
Yeah.
If my boss right there said, don't say a word, and then I went to her boss and said my words, I would have probably been fired.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did do at that point was I went back, I called all of my direct reports who had been there. I called all the senior vice presidents that were all, you know, I'm like, look, here's the thing that just happened, but we have built a great culture around here. Like what happened does not change anything about this. And to my direct reports, don't ever lead like that. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's like, I basically realized like, what does success look like around here? And we are going to have a courageous culture. I also started my blog that weekend, and then I started my own company a year later. So, but, you know, but that was also telling for me, I was in succession to move into those roles. And was that something that I wanted to do? And so that was a pivotal moment, but my team respected it, and we survived it because, you know, she's one person and we had built something extraordinary.
But that's, again, another piece of it is the courage to recognize when you are in the wrong environment. Yep. Or you are under the wrong leader, or whatever the term might be. But the self-awareness to go, yeah, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to be by example. That, you know, like you said, leaders go first. You got to be that person. What about for you, David?
Yeah, you know, mine is somewhat the opposite of a corporate jet type mega experience. For me, it was when I was, this has been repeated more than once, but I'll talk about the first one where I was 24 years old. I was a frontline leader with a team of 4 other people, and I fell on my face. Mm-hmm. And it was with great ambition and great motivation, as I had learned leaders need to have a vision and good teams have vision. And so I spent the weekend crafting this vision for our team. And I walked in, it was at an Einstein's bagel shop where we were meeting, and I had prepared nice envelopes for everybody and shared it all and everybody. And I was waiting for as people read through it and we talked about, I was waiting for the gongs to ring. And basically everybody looked at me like, what is wrong with you? And one guy on my team who I had enough of a relationship with, he says, David, were you going to talk to us? Like, there's nothing here from us. This is great. It's your thinking, but there's got nothing to do with us. Do you care what we care about? And, it was you're talking about the bucket of ice water. Well, that was one of those bucket of ice water moments. And with that same team, a few months later, we were trying to do some organizational change, and I had seen some problems that needed solved. And so I brought the problem, I brought the solution, and I don't think we can do that. That's not going to work. And I got that resistance and started realizing that how important it was to get other people's ideas in the conversation. And I was, on some level, just this dumb kid running and arrogantly just pushing forward. And I cared, and my heart was in a good place, but
sure,
my skills were horribly lacking. And so I had a lot to learn. But this notion of the importance of including voices in the conversation, both for the quality of the final outcome and then how you go about doing that. And that, excuse me, that's been a journey of learning how to do that more and more effectively over the years and in tougher and tougher situations. We are both just such tremendous believers that it is the ultimate competitive advantage, because with AI and everything else going on, like anything routine, that's just the price of entry. That's table stakes to be in the business you're in. Your competitive advantage are going to be your people. And the better you are at tapping into and creating a culture where they're contributing, that gives you your...
I think it's really important that we remind ourselves that we're not living in a command and control world anymore, and where leaders, quite honestly, believed that they had to have the answers. And so they showed up with the problem. They showed up with the answer and then told everybody to go do it. And that was fine as long as it's 1970, but it's not. And we're 50 years plus on, and we've got to do something different. Guys, obviously this is a conversation we can go on with for a while, and I love it. And thank you for everything that you've shared. We're very much close to the end here, and I just want to make sure that we do get to this, because there's two things I want to finish with. One is I want to make sure that everybody finds out about how they can reach out to you guys, all the resources you have, including the book. But I also always like to finish with what's a single practical thing that somebody listening, tuned in to this, watching right now, can go away and say, you know what, I'm going to do this right now. What is that thing? What's the practical?
So the first thing I would say is find one area where you really need a great idea. Be specific, and then go ask what we call a courageous question. And a courageous question is different than a how can we make this better question in two ways. It's specific and vulnerable. So one of Don Yeager, we talk about this in the book. He runs a contact center company. He says, what is one policy we have that just sucks? Right. So he asked his reps on the phone that question. He's been asking that question for 10 years. What's one policy we have that just sucks? Well, it's specific. I'm only asking for one. Right. And it's vulnerable. It's assuming improvement is possible. He's the COO. He makes the policies, right? So he makes it safe for people to talk. So that's where I would say ask a courageous question that's specific and vulnerable, that shows that improvement is possible.
I love that.
And then you got two of us, so you get two specific practicals.
Sure.
And the one that I would add is find some place to respond with regard. Somewhere in the next 24 or 48 hours, someone is going to have a thought, an idea. It may be 180 degrees the wrong direction, but if they took the time to think about it, to contribute it, stop and say, thank you. I really appreciate you thinking about how we could be better here. Here's some additional information to help with your thinking. And then that invitation, I would love to get your thoughts on X, Y, or Z. And changing culture takes time.
Yes.
And if all you do is ask, but you're not responding and encouraging, particularly when it's an idea that doesn't match up, as you said earlier, with the groupthink, particularly when it's an idea that isn't aligned strategically, those are the moments that are going to reinforce for everybody watching. Do you really mean it?
Yeah.
Do you really want this kind of culture where we are striving and everybody's voice is going to make us better? Or are you just looking for people to rubber stamp what you already think? Respond with regard.
Love it. Those are both really great practical guidelines. Thank you both so much for that. So as we finish, please tell our audience, our viewers and our listeners, where they can find out more about you both, about the company, about the book, and about all the wonderful resources.
Yeah, so it's Karin Hurt, Karin on LinkedIn, and David Dye, Dye. And our website is letsgrowleaders.com. And you can get everything you want there. We also, David runs a podcast called Leadership Without Losing Your Soul. I do a LinkedIn show called Asking for a Friend. All of that you can find by going letsgrowleaders.com, and lots of ways for us to connect. Download free chapters of the book, download free tools, all of that's there.
And the book is, of course, on Amazon and everywhere else that you would normally get books.
Yep.
So again, thank you both so much. It was a real pleasure and honor. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. There was some pretty delicious stuff in there, and I really encourage you, dear listener, to at least grab the book. And like I said, go to the website, go to letsgrowleaders.com. There's all kinds of great resources there that are going to be really effective and efficient for you. And, you know, like I said, even when you get the book, if you just go through the assessment and sort of go, okay, where are we really at? I think that's going to help you enormously. And remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders, and you can chat about this episode that you've been listening to or watching, and you can join into any of our past episodes by going into our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, they're only working at a fraction of your true capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, you can also go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Because unified, actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. We want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know today. Until next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can improve your entire culture by just being a leader who goes first with courage and then acknowledges the courage of others. Remember that. Vulnerability means leaders go first, but such a vitally important piece is that you respond with regard, as David has been drilling into us, by acknowledging that those people who are coming forward have had to take enormous courage, even if you think it's small. Because here's the deal, courage is subjective. Something that is easy for you may have been incredibly difficult for somebody else. Honor that. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning and reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.